Well, welcome to the Sales Scholars, where we talk to academic experts about anything and everything sales related. Our goal is to bring some of the top academic research in the world of selling and deliver it here to you in practical, easy to apply methods that can improve your business. Well, welcome to this episode of the Sales Scholars. I think I say this every time before our episodes, but I am really excited about our guest today. So I get a chance to welcome Dr. Stefanie Boyer from Bryant University. She's a professor of marketing and also the co-founder of Rainmakers, which is a virtual platform for both training and then talent assessment. We've had the fortunate opportunity as a group at the University of Houston to participate in one of the competitions using Rainmakers. So Stefanie, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and absolutely love your podcast.
No, I appreciate it. I do always say, I feel like a broken record. I'm like, hey, I'm excited about this episode of the podcast, but I am especially because one thing I realized in my first conversation with you is you will definitely bring energy to a conversation.
No, it's so needed. I mean, to be able to bring what we're doing in academia into the professional world, I mean, so relevant and I love it. It's engaging and entertaining. So congratulations.
Oh no, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate it. I know we got a lot of stuff to cover during this episode, but one of the things I always love to get some perspective on from our guests is, how in the world did you get into the academic world?
Good question. I didn't have a direct path as a child. The last thing that I thought I would be is a sales professor. I had a lot of different types of jobs. I was a firefighter. I worked at US Customs. I sold financial services. When I was in college, I was a javelin thrower, hoping that I could get into the Olympic trials and maybe be a javelin coach in college one day. So my life went on twists and turns all over the place. But when I had a career-ending injury in college and I hurt my back, I realized that I didn't know anything about business. I was studying psychology and criminology, and I decided to go ahead and get my MBA so I could study business. I thought, who's this Dow Jones person that's giving people money? I need to learn about this. I didn't know anything about anything. And when I got there, I found marketing, and then that pulled together some of my love for sales, for some of the sales roles I had, and all the communication and the psychology that I had learned already. And it just really tied it together. I met some of the people in the Department of Marketing at the University of South Florida when I was getting my MBA. And I thought, you know what? This is exactly what I want to do. And I applied. And luckily I got in, and I probably harassed him a little bit too much, stopping by every day. Did I get in? Did I get in? I think I wore them down. And I didn't really know that I wanted to research sales right away, but I found excellent mentors that were interested in it with Andy Artis and Paul Solomon, who that was their area of research. And actually, Andy Artis, he was working on a project on self-directed learning and asked if I'd be interested in a meta-analysis. So, that's how I really landed up there, and then that was really the entry into sales.
Awesome. Your career track was you started with firefighter and throwing javelins. And is it safe to say that adventure and adrenaline are part of what you like to do?
I think so. It's just, always exploring. And, when you're a firefighter, you get called to the scene and you know exactly what's happening. So everyone's driving by and they're rubbernecking, right? Is that they're trying to see, and you know exactly what's happening. And I used to tell everybody, if you need me, call 911. That was so cool. But I was hoping nobody would actually do that. Like, can I talk to Stefanie?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I bet you have great stories to bring into the classroom too with your students from all those experiences.
It is fun. I mean, and it's so interesting how sales skills are really a part of everything. And so you might think, how can you really translate being a firefighter into needing selling skills? But you sure can. I mean, when you're going in and you're talking to the people who've called an emergency call, you need critical information for them, and you have to develop that rapport and ask the right questions to find out what you need so that you don't go into a building and there's a gas leak and you get injured, right? So
Yeah. Wow. No, that's really cool. I bet you have a ton of stories. One that you mentioned self-directed learning, and I know that that's an area of specialty for you and what you've studied, and this idea of having a sales team that is committed to learning. I think at the heart of self-directed is, hey, you want people who want to learn. And as a former sales manager myself, I know if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, Craig, would you like some people on your team who are really committed to growing and learning?" I'd be like, well, of course I do. But as you have studied that topic, I'm curious of some of the things that you've found from a research standpoint that really drives some salespeople to just like continue to want to learn and continue to grow versus some of those who are just set in their ways.
It's so interesting how learning does drive performance over time. We in the early 2000s, we were looking at, why is it that you have some salespeople on your team that are these high performers? They're making hundreds of thousands of dollars and they don't let their foot off the gas. They just keep going and going. But then you have these other people that they're mildly successful. I mean, well, I guess not mildly successful. Once they hit about six digits, once they hit about 100,000, then they started really focusing more on quality of life, going golfing on Fridays instead of coming into work, and maybe going out and just having some wine, just relaxing. I mean, who knows? Maybe they have it figured out. But what we noticed, we're like, what is the difference? Why is it that you have some people that just kind of get to a point, they have accounts with residual income coming in? As long as the person doesn't cancel their policy, they continue to make decent money. They're not out there hitting the streets and continuing to try to grow and drive their business. And so that big difference was whether someone was self-directed or not. And so there's a scale that you can use that can measure how self-directed somebody is. But then what happens to everybody else in your organization where they may not naturally be this person that's really into learning? What about everybody else? Because not everybody is like that. So there's training that you can do, and you can teach people to be a little bit more self-directed. So you can have that trait, or you can have more of a training program related to that. So, maybe not everybody loves to learn and wants to learn, but we know for sure that there's some things that you can do when you're training your employees that are going to be better than others. So if you look at a lot of the training that's out there, you might have training in sales that's classroom based. It's not related to the real world that the employee is in. Maybe they have to do some certification, or maybe they have to train on a skill that they already know or they feel like they've mastered. They don't really get any say in the learning and then the training. And so the salesperson feels like it's kind of an attack on their competence, but then they also feel like, what a waste of my time. I could be calling on customers. So for the organization, if they give their employees a little bit more autonomy to help them make the decisions about the learning or be more involved in that process, then the employee is going to actually be more satisfied with the learning, and they're going to be more motivated, and their learning outcomes are going to actually be better as well. So look for people that are self-directed, but even if you find people that are not, you can still offer them opportunities where they can get more excited about the learning and go into that path as well.
Gotcha. So when you did some study on the topic and you were looking at the difference between, I guess, self-directed and or not self-directed, or just the things that you were comparing and contrasting, were there any big ahas that jumped out at you that were like, okay, hey, this is something that really could help a business in terms of how to approach the salesperson?
Well, there are some people that want a lot of hand holding from the organization, and some people do not. So, how much autonomy does somebody want? And at first, I thought, gosh, give everybody an opportunity to be self directed. It's right for every single person. But what I learned in my own classes and out in research is that it's not right. Some people need a lot more structure than others. And so the kinds of self-directed learning projects that you would give them will have more structure than others. So some people can be left on their own and you say you figure out what you want to learn. That's okay. When you really look at it, how much contextual understanding does someone have? versus how much does the organization need to be involved. So contextual understanding is like if somebody's brand new, they don't know the product, they don't know the industry, giving them a project to be self-directed is almost like information overload. So they don't know anything anyway, so they have no idea what to look for, where to get information, how to get information, or like what they really even need to learn or where their skill gap is. So they'll need help to identify those things. So for an organization, you're going to be doing like mandatory trainings and giving them the basic skills. The organization is going to be really, really involved, and the employee doesn't need any contextual understanding to be able to do that. And then you can go further along as the employee starts to have a higher level of contextual understanding. So they know the environment, they're starting to learn about the customers, right? So they have more knowledge. Then you can kind of let them loose. Maybe your organization has a library of like trainings and videos. It's not required, but the employee can come in and use them. Then, as you get further along, maybe the organization gives the employee some tools or like some suggestions, or maybe nothing. Maybe just they financially support the employee that says, I need to go to this class and learn this thing that's outside the organization. So the organization starts to step away as the contextual understanding increases of the employee. And so you've got to get those levels right. If you get somebody that's been in the industry a long time and you give them the basic training, they hate that. And then if you get somebody that's brand new and you give them, a lot of leeway and opportunity to decide, they can't handle that either because they don't know enough to do that. So that was really the big aha, was you have to balance contextual understanding, with how involved the organization is in structuring the types of learning projects and assignments to give.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm making my own notes from learning things that you're talking about, because you know what, it's counterintuitive in terms of the way, maybe that's counterintuitive, it's counter application of how some companies teach new people. Like I've worked with an organization, their way to teach new people was bring them in, put them with a senior person, and just kind of go figure it out. And at times that seems to be a less effective way to introduce somebody in the organization. It sounds like your research is telling you that, yeah, in fact, that's a bad way. If they don't have the context, then the degree at which you really have to be engaged with them, and maybe this isn't the right term, but kind of feeding them the learning and or holding them accountable for some progression, man, they're just going to have a tough time starting.
I think that's right. And so think about the sales programs that are out there. University of Houston has an incredible sales program. There's over 150 sales programs. If you're getting students that are coming from great sales programs and they understand the sales process and they're not afraid to go in and do some role plays and they've had experiences, then they might be able to start out a little bit further along, right? They're going to need some basic product training and understand what the culture is like, but they're going to be able to ramp up so much faster because they already have contextual understanding about what sales is. But if you're hiring a brand new person and they don't even know a lick about sales, they've never done it. Maybe they've done door-to-door sales as a Girl Scout or
Yeah.
something, selling cookies. That they have had some experience, but they don't really understand that in-depth sales process. Then they're really going to struggle. They need to go slower, step by step, in order to understand not just the sales role, but the environment and the competition and the sales process and so much more.
Yeah. No, I think that's helpful because that's a mistake I think is easy to make as a manager, is the trying to figure out, hey, how hands off or how hands on. And it sounds like the answer is it depends. And as a manager, you have to try to figure that out with your team. But you can directionally you can use some a marker like, okay, hey, if they're new with no experience,
Hmm.
more hands on. If they're more senior, lots of experience, maybe less. Is there anything in particular? Like if I was a sales manager and I came to you and I said, "Hey, Stephanie, I want to foster a really good, like self-directed environment in my company. What are the best ways that I could do that?"
I think probably the best way to get started is to start out with a self-directed learning project. So you have someone that's in. I wouldn't create the self-directed learning project at the very beginning with a newbie, because they're going to say, I don't even know what is what, right? So they need some of that basic training, but offer them self-directed learning projects. So self-directed learning project, you might say to an employee, maybe started out 6 months or so after they've been there, or later on in their careers, have them, look at their resume, or look at what they're doing in their job and think about, where do they want to go from here. So maybe they look at, what's my job title, and they have their own resume, they have their own LinkedIn profile that's kind of like their resume. And then you say, well, where do you want to get to? What level do you want to stay here forever? Do you want to be able to, be in a senior role? Do you want to be a leader? Do you want to be a manager? Like, where do you want to go from here? So then have them look on LinkedIn and see, okay, where is the skill gap between where you are now and the experience gap, right? Those knowledge, skills, abilities, experiences. So where are you now versus where do you want to go? And have them start to identify, well, this person has had these experiences or has had this much time, this kind of training or this kind of certification in order to get to where they want to be. Maybe even interview the person. What did it take to get to this role? So then now the individual that's learning is identifying the skill gap from where they are to where they want to be. And they start to create their own program of, well, what do I need to do to acquire this knowledge? What are the resources I would need to get there? Who's going to keep me accountable? What would success look like? So if I got this skill on how to use Excel, what would that look like? And what kind of project could I do to show that I've mastered this? So they would get to come up with these different programs, these different tasks that they would have to do. And they would also be responsible for finding some experts. So finding a person or two that is an expert in that skill set to be able to evaluate and mentor and coach so that they can acquire that. So now if this employee is saying, this is what I need to learn to get to where I want to go, and all of these things, this is how I'm going to learn it and when and where and which resources. Now that person owns their learning. It doesn't have to be all learning, but it could be little projects that you take on, 3 or 6 month projects, and they have to check in, and they're going to continually just build that skill set. So I did these projects in my MBA class. I do some in my undergraduate sometimes. And my students during the class in the MBA program, they completed their projects, and several of them got promotions at work before the class was over, just because they started working on these self-directed learning projects. So it's challenging because it's individualized, but the rewards are very, very high.
Yeah, that's what, as you were describing it, I'm thinking, okay, it sounds like it's a one track is the individualized learning that somebody's engaging at on your team. And then other tracks are things you're doing as with groups and things like that. But clearly, the importance of this individualized track for you to identify the skills and you can develop them. How do you think about this? Like, again, I'm going to put my sales manager hat on. I'm a sales leader and I'm having training meetings with my team. And with my team, I've got, I'm all over the board. I got some new people. I got some experienced people. Like, what's the best way to approach those types of formats for education?
Sure. I mean, in the classroom, we see something very similar. Like, everybody has a different skill set that they're bringing. Everybody has a different project that they're working on. And so the team can actually help and give each other guidance. There's a lot of peer learning involved. And someone might say, I'm stuck here. Now you have the whole team that's helping. It creates a collaborative environment within the team as well. So the manager takes this facilitation and coaching role. The manager doesn't have to know everything. But what this also does is it makes sure that, typically, like, if you have an employee and the manager is saying, these are your goals, this is what you have to do because this is the organization's goals, the employee might have their own goals that they want. And so if the employee's goals and the organization's goals don't align, then someone's probably not going to be there much
Yeah.
longer, right?
Yeah,
But if you
that's a
have
problem.
this project and the organization's goals are now aligned with the employee's goals, because they're saying, where do you want to go? And work on the project that's going to get you to where we want you to be too, and where you want to go. Now there's that synergy and alignment of both sides. so that you're working on it. It is a little bit more work than just saying everybody's doing this training and we're going to go have a training event and it's over. But the results are very, very positive in terms of higher performance, more satisfaction, and more motivation to do the learning.
Yeah. Well, that's really insightful because I think that's the every organization, I think you struggle with learning, and especially nowadays where we've gotten into the highly individualized and customized experiences, in a lot of different domains. That's kind of what people are used to. So then the idea of personalized learning is, it's a hot topic, and this obviously is a I love the project assignment because I feel like you could do that like you do it in class, but I'm thinking about if I went back to when I had my sales team. I mean, I could do that with my 8 sales reps. I mean, there's no reason why we couldn't have a quarterly learning project, something that somebody working on to develop themselves. That's part of their growth, and then part of the regular conversation that we have in terms of their development and where they're trying to get to. So I love that as an idea.
It makes the learning so much more fun. And I wouldn't come up with the creative ideas that I've seen people come up with in the past. I had one of my students. He wanted to improve his resilience because he felt like rejection is tough. Rejection is so hard, and he put himself through the gauntlet where he would have to do things where he was definitely going to fail, or it was going to be really hard to hear what people would say. I remember he was doing all of these really embarrassing things, and it was just one hit after another to his ego. And he still tells me, gosh, I think it's been almost 8 years, 8 or 9 years now since he did the project, and he still has learned some of these lessons. And he would do everything. He would go out to the bar next to campus, and he would go up to the most beautiful women, and he would say, rate my appearance on a scale from 1 to 10. And like just all these things where he knew he was going to get some kind of rejection or some kind of knock to his ego, but he built up that resilience and that ability to handle rejection. And if you can handle it personally like that, then if someone doesn't want your product, then okay, it's a little bit easier to handle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, resilience is, I think, one of those things that if you're going to sell and be good at selling, you're going to have to get used to rejection and be resilient and continue to move on. So that's a great story. I love that. There's a book actually. It's called Rejection Proof. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's basically the same concept that your student did, where the author, and I can't remember his name, but he put himself through 30 straight days of doing things that were going to naturally generate rejection, and through the process he certainly developed more resiliency, but he actually learned what I love about the book is there's kind of these lessons on how to handle rejection
Hmm.
that can be of great value to young sellers. I talk about it in this particular book in my entry level sales class because I'm thinking, look, you're going to get rejected. And so, it's learning how to handle it and how to move on from it, I think is where you spend your time and energy.
Exactly. And as his teacher, I would have never told him to do those things, but that was what he needed. And that was something that, almost a decade later, he still thinks about that and it continues to help him.
Yeah.
So, your employees really have creative ideas and they'll push themselves if you let them. But I mean,
Yeah.
just think about it. Like if your boss says you need to learn how to play golf because you have an important meeting with this client and you're going to play golf, then you're like, okay, I don't really want to, but I'll do it. Or you might say, you might be excited about it, but it wasn't your choice. Versus if you decided on your own, you're like, oh man, I have this really important client. We're going to do this golf outing. And, to have a little bit more skill than I have would be so important. Right. And you decide and you're like, okay, I'm going to take some lessons. I'm going to do this because it's important. And I realize the value of this. You're going to be so much more motivated because it was your own idea than if someone else is telling you, oh, you got to learn golf, you got to learn tennis, you have to learn this other thing, right? So makes a
Yeah.
big difference.
Yeah. You have to learn how to qualify. You have to learn how, like all the sales things, it's easy to say, hey, you have to go learn this. versus the other way around. So I could see how there would be so much value in that. Well, I know you get a chance too because of the I mentioned the intro, co-founder of Rainmakers. As part of that work, you get this, like, I think a really unique view of the next generation of sellers. And so I'm curious, what are some of the challenges you've seen that young sellers experience when they first step into selling that maybe could help, help companies who are hiring new people?
Well, right now it's such a strange environment because our students have been on Zoom calls and strange classes with masks on, and so they haven't had as many of the social experiences that the students 5 years ago were able to get, and some of their internships were canceled, so they just don't get all of that opportunity. So the students still need more training on storytelling, on being able to adapt and to think on their feet, some problem solving. And what we've seen just with the data from Rainmakers, with over 100,000 role plays with the AI bot in the last year, that there's still a pretty sizable gap when it comes to discovery. So during the discovery process, when you're trying to identify, and I mean, and it's not just students, a lot of people have these problems. I do training myself, and to get the salespeople to dig into discovery enough, that's a big challenge. So getting into not just what's the challenge and, oh, I have a solution. It's what's the challenge and what's the impact of that, and what does that really mean for your team, and what does it mean in a year or 6 months or 3 years or 5 years down the road. And then also that need payoff question, right? And trying to understand, do you value this? What would a solution mean for you? And what would happen if we're able to help you over the next 6 months if this problem doesn't exist anymore? What would you do to, where would you spend your resources and your time? So we're seeing that still is a challenge. What organizations can do, definitely do as many role plays as you can. What we've seen with the data in Rainmakers is that when students hit that 50 to 70 role play mark, they really close that skill gap on discovery.
Gotcha. I'm sure somebody's going to be listening to this and they'll have heartburn thinking, that many role plays. But the idea of practice, and intentional practice and getting the feedback, which I think is so important. It sounds like, yep, if you just keep doing it, you will close the gap. And it sounds like you've got data to prove it.
Exactly. And we don't learn something and just remember it right away and we're able to apply it. We have to continue on. I think about my kids and it's like, get your elbows off the table, get your elbows. How many times maybe I have to say it 50 to 70 times to get them to remember to keep their elbows off the table or whatever it is. It's like, we have to remember, we have to practice and get the feedback on how we're doing to be able to get it right. And when it comes to sales, it's not just knowing what you need to know, it's applying what you need to apply. Nobody has a multiple choice with their customer of like, what do you want to say? It's, answer these questions. It's, you have to figure out what you're going to say to your customer. And there's no worksheet to guide you on that. It's that whole idea of the Gi Joe fallacy. Have you heard of that?
No.
At the
No,
the
and
Gi Joe.
I dig Gi Joe, so I want to hear it.
So you do. So you remember those cartoons. What did they always say at the end of the cartoon?
I don't remember.
I know it's been a while. I mean, it was the 80s. The Gi Joe was big in the cartoons. At the very end of it, they would say, "Knowing is half the battle," and it's not. When it comes to sales, you have to be able to do it. You have to be able to apply it. Knowing might be 10% of the battle, but the application of that knowledge is really where the meat of it is.
Yeah, man. Sales theology by Gi Joe. I love it. That's great. Well, look, Stefanie, we are at the end of our time today, which stinks because this would be, I'm sure we could have even more conversation, but thank you for joining us on this episode of the Sales Scholars.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I can't wait to hear the rest of the episodes. I recently found it over the last month, and so I haven't gotten through everything yet, but I'm so excited to hear the rest of your guests. And thank you.